All right, I'm gonna pop off camera.
Okay, perfect. We'll give it just a minute or so for those who are joining. Welcome, everybody. Okay, and I'll go ahead and start. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Allison DeGuy, and I'm with the Illinois Restaurant Association. I'd like to thank you for joining today's webinar, Sound Solutions, Music Licensing Essentials for Restaurant Owners. Today's webinar is being broadcast in English, Spanish, and Mandarin Chinese. To listen in Spanish or Chinese, please use the interpretation button on your toolbar. This webinar is being presented by the Illinois Restaurant Association in partnership with the Cook County Small Business Source. Established to ensure businesses emerge from COVID-19 intact and positioned for growth, the Small Business Source connects small business owners with expert guidance and support. Services include no-cost business advising, resources, and events that connect small business owners with a community of advisors. For one-on-one business advising, sign up at cookcountysmallbiz.org. It's free and easy to sign up. Also, before we begin, I'd like everyone who attending to know that the Illinois Restaurant Association remains a resource to you. We send regular email updates with what you need to know, and you can sign up for those on our website. For today's webinar, you can use the Q&A button to post your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. At this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Jessica Frost, Assistant Vice President of Customer Experience and Engagement at Broadcast Music, Inc. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining on this Monday morning. I hope you all had a good weekend. Just to give a little bit of background about myself, I work in our Nashville office, and I joined BMI actually 25 years ago this April. So I love the whole idea of talking to business owners and music users about what BMI does and the role we play, because I do understand that there's a lot of confusion and sometimes frustration in the marketplace about what BMI actually does and the service we provide to your business. So thank you for joining, and let's jump in. So what are we going to talk about today? First and foremost, we can't really talk about music licensing without talking about federal copyright law. A lot of questions we get from business owners is this a state law? Is this a city law? Does it vary across the country? Federal copyright law is universal across the United States, and there's actually multiple musical copyrights, but we'll talk about the one specifically that pertains to business owners and the one that BMI licenses on behalf of. We'll talk about how BMI is a service organization. You'll hear me refer to performing rights organizations. That's essentially what BMI is, an American Performing Rights Organization. And we collect and distribute licensing fees when songwriters affiliate and register their musical works with us. I will talk about the performing rights landscape because, as many business owners know, there is more than one performing rights organization in the United States. I think that creates a good bit of the confusion. I'll talk a little bit about SongView, which is where business owners can go in and access our musical data and get a better understanding of who we actually represent and who's written particular songs that you're playing in your business. We will talk about what uses are actually licensable in a business, specific guidelines for restaurants, bars, and breweries. What does that license look like, and how are the fees determined? I will get into digital service providers and commercial music services because a lot of businesses opt to go with those providers, and it's important they understand what they're paying. Of course, BMI works with the Illinois Restaurant Association in partnership to help educate the marketplace and support the industry through events throughout the year. There are some legal ramifications when a business decides to publicly perform music and not license that music, so I will speak a little bit about that. And of course, my favorite part is opening it up to the questions. That's where we really get into the meat of what people, have questions about specific to their business. So please be thinking about some questions that you want to ask at the end. So essentially, what is copyright? Our founding fathers actually wrote copyright into the Constitution. They were forward enough thinking to think about, of course, they were doing it more from the written word, of course, at that time. But essentially what they were saying is that if any of us on this call come up with a really great idea, whether it's a screenplay, a book, a song, certain businesses, right? Copyright the name of their businesses, that we have certain rights as the creator of that idea. And what that essentially says is that if someone else wants to use that idea that we created, that we, have to be able to give them permission to do so. People can't use people's ideas without getting permission, and that we should also be compensated for that use. I always like to remind people that when you think about especially musical copyrights, we've lost some musical greats in the last couple of years: Prince, David Bowie, John Prine, just to name a few. It is important to know that copyright lasts from 70 years of the death of the actual creator. So David Bowie's estate, Prince's estate, they're still receiving musical royalty copyrights in the form of royalties every time their songs are publicly performed. All right, next slide. You might have to get it. So I love this image. Probably for some of the younger folks on this call, this may not be as, you may not remember this as much because no one uses DVDs anymore. Occasionally you will still see it when you're watching a movie at home. I like to, just show this image because we're all very familiar with seeing this. It's something you can't pass over when you're about to watch a movie. This thing comes up and you're like, ah. And it's basically saying, what is it saying? It's saying that, if you're looking at watching this movie in the privacy of your home, then you have the coverage to do so. You don't need to do anything. But the minute you take this film and show it someplace in public, there's certain licensing requirements. The same thing exists for music. The difference is there's no image that pops up when we're using music. If we're, I have an Apple Music subscription. I'm sure when I originally signed up for that subscription and checked off a ton of different boxes that were saying you're agreeing to this, you're agreeing to that before you sign up. This language is written in there, but it's tiny and none of us read all of that. But essentially the same rules apply for music. When you think about any type of subscription you have, purchasing CDs, you're basically, the cost of that is what you're paying for you to have personal access to that in the privacy of your home or car. But the minute you take that into a public setting in your business, you need license, you need the permissions to be obtained, and you need to license that for public performance of music. All right, next slide. So what are musical copyrights? They're essentially that you've got mechanical royalties. This is anything when you think about duplicating a record, CD, cassette, digital file. This is not something that would pertain to businesses. I just like to bring it up because there are more musical copyrights than just the public performance. That would be mechanical royalties. Essentially, usually people are reaching out to the actual record label. When you think about synchronization fees, that's what you have music assigned with any kind of visual image. So when you think about seeing a Target ad and they're using a song from the Beatles, they've gone through and Target has licensed that from a sync fee directly with their record label. But the public performance of music is a little bit different because essentially songwriters get to choose what performing rights organization they want to affiliate with, like BMI. I'll get into some of the other players in just a minute. And once they decide to affiliate with a PRO, they then register their musical works with us. And so when a business is publicly performing music in their business and they secure a BMI license, we are then taking those licensing fees that we collect and distributing them back to our affiliates in the form of royalties, which we do on a quarterly basis. So specifically about BMI, we've actually been around for a really long time. We were founded in 1939. We are currently the largest performing rights organization in the world, representing 1.4 million songwriters, composers, and music publishers, and a catalog of about 22.4 million songs. We have offices in Austin, Atlanta, London, Los Angeles, Nashville, and New York. We also have reciprocal agreements with almost 200 performing rights organizations from around the globe. So this is important. This is not just a US copyright law. Most of the major countries around the world represent intellectual property. And to give you an example, Taylor Swift is a very successful BMI songwriter. She signed with us when she was about 14 years old. And any time that her music is being performed around the globe, there are PROs, performing rights organizations, in those respective countries that are collecting those licensing fees, and they distribute it back to BMI so we can distribute those to her. We currently have more than 80 different music licenses for all various businesses. I always remind people, I think especially restaurant and bar owners many times are like, are we the only ones that have to do this? When you essentially think of any business that you go into throughout your day-to-day life and you hear music playing, it's very likely, that music is indeed licensable. So I like to think of BMI as we are really a service organization. Music creators join with us, and then we provide blanket licenses for music users. I always stress to business owners that there's nothing legally that says that a business owner has to secure a BMI blanket license. They could essentially decide that they want to reach out to each and every songwriter that they're going to play their music and publishers and negotiate a rate with them and pay them directly. But as we all know, when you think about all of the various songs that get played in a business every day, that would be virtually impossible and much more expensive. So we make it much easier for music creators to connect with music users and make that kind of seamless relationship. So business owners don't have to worry about, they know when they sign a BMI blanket license, they have access to play all of the music in BMI's catalog as often as they want. So how does it work? And you'll just have to click through all the way for these to fill in, sorry. Essentially, songwriters first join with BMI. And I listed just a few here. Obviously, we have well over 1 million. These are some ones that I'm sure all of you know very well. It's important for business owners to understand that many of the songs that you know and love are not necessarily written by the artists that perform them, or if they are written by the artists that perform them, they have co-written with other people. Luke Combs is a perfect example. He writes with many people in Nashville. Miranda Lambert is the same way. She writes with Jack Ingram a lot, who may not be a household name to everyone, but he co-writes on many of her songs. We all know Dolly Parton. One of Dolly Parton's biggest hits, I Will Always Love You, was the hit for Whitney Houston. I mean, Dolly Parton had cut that song, but because of Whitney Houston and how huge she was in her career at that time, and the movie The Bodyguard, that ended up being one of Dolly Parton's most top performing songs. And again, even though she's an artist, it was another artist that performed that. And, Dolly Parton still got compensated for that. So once songwriters join with us, BMI, we reach out to businesses every day. Lots of businesses decide to have music in their establishment, and we want to make sure they understand that they do need to be licensed and get them on the right license that they need to be on. We track performances. I think last year it was well over 1 trillion performances that we track, and we do all of that from radio, television, films, international internet. When you think about YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all of those providers are providing us with tons of data of how much these songs are being played on their services. And that we then feed into our distribution department. And then that's how they decide and end up paying out to our affiliates each quarter. So who are the players? I mentioned that BMI is not the only PRO in the United States. ASCAP, which stands for the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, were actually founded in 1914. They are owned and governed by their members, which essentially means that their board is made up of songwriters and publishers. They operate under a federal consent decree, which BMI also operates under, and I'll give a little bit more detail about that with BMI. ASCAP currently represents about 700,000 affiliated songwriters, and their royalties are paid quarterly. So BMI was founded in 1939, and it was mainly because at the time, ASCAP was the main player in town. The main way we were consuming music, of course, in the 30s was radio, right? There weren't all the various ways that music is consumed now. But radio broadcasters were starting to see their rates go up quite a bit with ASCAP. And they said, how can we create some competition in the marketplace? We don't have anyone else to go to license this music. And at the time, ASCAP was only signing songwriters that had had multiple hits, which means a lot of the up-and-coming genres of music in the 30s, which was hillbilly music, which is now called country, and rhythm and blues, which of course ended up heading into rock and creating rock, those songwriters could not get any representation, meaning they were writing songs, they were being performed, and they were not getting paid. So the broadcasters that founded BMI said, we're going to have an open door policy. We're going to let any genre of music join us. And, now we're the largest PRO in the world with almost 1.5 million affiliated songwriters. I will go back to with ASCAP and BMI. It's important to note that we both operate under a federal consent decree, which means we cannot negotiate rates. So when we are speaking to a business owner in any of the markets that we license, there's no negotiating of rates. The rate that is outlined on there is the rate. Now, BMI has some, timely pay discounts in place, and other discounts that can go to the marketplace. But we cannot, it's not like if I use the example, if there's a bar in downtown Nashville and Broadway that's the same size as a bar in Chicago, and they have the same amount of music each week, their license fee will be exactly the same. CSAC was created in 1930, and they are the Society of European Stage Authors and Composers. They are a privately held company. They are invitation only, so songwriters, they essentially don't sign up and coming songwriters. They pick songwriters with fairly large catalogs. They are much smaller than BMI and ASCAP. They currently represent about 30,000 affiliated songwriters. Because they do not operate under a consent decree, business owners can negotiate with them on their licensing rates. And even though they are much smaller than BMI, I always remind business owners they do have some fairly large, very accomplished songwriters affiliated with them with very large catalogs, Bob Dylan being one of them, who may have one of the most large musical catalogs in the world. And the last player in the space is GMR, Global Music Rights. It is a newer player in the marketplace. They were founded in 2013 by Irving Azoff, who was a manager for many, many years for the Eagles. They are invitation only. And even though they are much smaller, they do have some very large songwriters affiliated with them, like Bruce Springsteen, Post Malone, Lizzo. So I always encourage business owners, to go and check their website. It is important to note before we move to the next slide that when a business secures a license with ASCAP and BMI, you are covering about 90% of all popular music in all genres. So the other two, even though do have some very successful songwriters, it's a much smaller portion of the musical marketplace. So I like to use this example. If you've listened at all to the radio, there's certain songs throughout the year you can't get away from. They're hugely successful songs. This being one of them, Hoser, this Too Sweet, was a very successful song in 2024. And if you go to the next slide, you will see that this is SongView, the database that I was speaking about earlier that was actually created by BMI and ASCAP. This is Too Sweet, Hoser's song. So if you go in here and you look, and anyone can do this, anyone on this call could go to SongView on BMI.com. You could put songs that you hear regularly playing in your business, or if you've got a band that plays certain cover songs, you could go in and put in the name of those songs, and it will pull up the writers and composers. And as you can see on this song, there's a lot of songwriters. Songwriters rarely, you have someone like Willie Nelson, you have Dolly Parton, you have Taylor Swift that are predominantly writing their own songs by themselves. Most of popular music you hear nowadays has multiple songwriters on it. In fact, I think Beyonce's country album that she worked with a lot of people in Nashville on that was released earlier this year, they said there was an average of 12 songwriters on every one of those songs. So when we're talking to business owners, they say, well, I already have a BMI license. I don't need any other licenses. I always say you need to go out and look, because there are very few songs anymore that are 100% with a PRO. Songwriters are collaborative and they like to work together. So what's licensable in a business? Live music. I do always stress with business owners on this. Many times we'll get calls from business owners where they say, well, I've already spoken to the band. They said they've secured the licensing fees to cover them. Certain states and cities do have requirements or licenses like city permits for bands to play or karaoke or DJ. Those are not covering for the public performance in your business. None of the PROs, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR, none of us license bands, karaoke providers, DJ providers. Essentially, the way the law was written is that, the business owner is deciding what takes place in their business. So the public performance of the music has to be secured by the actual owner of the business. DJs, of course, are licensable. Karaoke is licensable. Televisions, we get this question a lot. I know that businesses pay quite a bit to their cable network providers for access to television programming in their restaurant or bar, but none of those cable programmers are covering the actual public performance that occurs once you turn on those TVs in your business. All you're paying to them is access to those programs, just like you're doing with your music subscription through Apple Music. So you're paying to access it and be able to show it in your business. The minute music is being performed over the TVs in your business, it is licensable. And you think about sporting events, there's tons of music. Mike Post is a BMI songwriter. He wrote the couple of chords that you hear at the beginning of Law and Order, which of course, as we all know, has paid him very well. You can't get away from hearing the beginning. We all know if we're even in the other room in our house, when we hear that, what's coming on. So there's all of the music that you hear on television that's being performed is definitely affiliated with the PRO. So what is a BMI restaurant, bar, and brewery license? What is your fees determined by? It's based on the type of music, the frequency of music, the size of your business, your posted occupancy or fire code, if you have dancing or charge a cover charge. And it's important to note that TVs are included in the recorded fee. So if a business is already paying for DJ, or if you're paying for a vinyl record night, or if you're paying for CDs for background, there's not an additional fee for televisions. That's included in the recorded fee. What are the benefits of a BMI music license? Again, it gives you access to over, 20 million songs written by almost 1.5 million songwriters. The license is tailored to your specific needs. I do always remind business owners that, if it's better for you from a budgeting standpoint to pay quarterly or semi-annually, we do have those options. And there's also the option to change your BMI music license up to 4 times a year. So I always tell business owners, if they say, we want to try karaoke, we don't know if it's going to be successful, we don't know if our customers are going to like it, that's fine. You can put it on your license. If you try it a few months and it doesn't match your business, it's not providing value, you can just call us and let us know and we'll take that fee off. And also, of course, you're supporting the creation of music by licensing the music. So streaming services have become very popular. And I admit that's how I listen to all of them music now. And there is a lot of confusion in the marketplace with these. It's important for you to know that these providers are not covering the public performance licensing fees for a business. So essentially, again, it's like your cable network, your TV providers, you're just paying for access to the music for your own personal use when you're walking or in your home or car. When you take that into business, it's essentially the same as taking in a CD or having a DJ. You would still need that recorded music license coverage. There are a few, on the next slide, there are a few commercial music services that do cover the public performance licensing fees for businesses with certain restrictions. So Mood Media, Soundtrack Your Brand, Cloud Cover Music, Pandora for business, SiriusXM for business. It's important to note most of these, how you know the difference of that they are providing the public performance licensing. Most of these have particular hardware that you're setting up in your business. It's not something that's just going through your phone. And also the monthly rates are more expensive. And that's because they are collecting the public performance licensing fees and distributing them back to the PROs. So if you only are wanting to use music, recorded music for background music, and you don't charge a cover in your business, you don't have people dancing to the music, this may be the most affordable option for you. If you are going to do other things in your business, it's probably best just to pay the recorded fee, and then you can, access and play whatever music you want. Teresa did ask me to bring up something. We are getting into the holiday season, and I know it's hard to believe. I just went in to Anthropologie over the weekend and said, oh my God, they've already got all this Christmas stuff. I'm totally not ready. I haven't gotten through Halloween. We all know that basically right after Halloween, they were going to be bombarded by holiday music, and holiday music is indeed licensable. The one song we all hear way too much of, I personally think in the holidays, is Mariah Carey. She is not with BMI, she's with ASCAP, but indeed those songs are licensable. And here's just a few options that I, pulled that, we know of over the years. And, that these songwriters are indeed being compensated for this. So how do we work? BMI really appreciates the relationship with many of the state associations that we work with. Hospitality and music really go hand in hand. And we found that over the years. We loved being a part of the Chef's Table event for the last 2 years, which is such an incredibly fun event, and sponsoring the music. So I hate to end with this slide, but I always get this question. So what if a business decides that they're not going to license the music? Technically, under US copyright law, you can be held liable for copyright infringement, and it can be very expensive. Statutory damages can be up to $30,000 for each copyrighted song performed, and up to $150,000 for each copyrighted song if deemed willful infringement. And willful infringement is essentially if a performing rights organization has been contacting a business for many, many months and sending them out information about their need to license, and they've continued to use the music and not secured the license. That is considered willful infringement, that they are aware that they needed to license and chose not to do so. Obviously, this is the last route any of the PROs like to go. We want businesses to publicly perform music, but we also want to make sure that they're paying the licensing fees for that. And it is important to note that the business owner can be required to pay the copyright owner's cost, including attorney fees. So one of the, things that we always try, by the time we have entered a state with a business where we're entering the legal route, many times we've been contacting this business for many, many months. We've made numerous phone call attempts, sent numerous letters. Please, I always tell business owners, if you have not secured a license and the messaging from the performing rights organizations is getting stronger, like you need to take care of this, please contact your association and get some advice from them. Because I do feel like over the years, attorneys many times that represent restaurant and bar owners are not necessarily as knowledgeable about copyright law as some of the other laws they see day to day in a business. And so I feel like sometimes business owners are not given the full picture of what their liability can be. So obviously we're here to answer any questions. I'm going to open up the floor to anyone that has any questions on the call, but I'd love for you to take down my email address, and my colleague Josh Lagerson, he also works with me on our education outreach. If you have questions, if you're receiving emails or letters from BMI, and you have questions about what you need to do, you're confused about it, we are not licensing representatives for BMI. We really work on the educational side, and we are always available to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you so much. We have some great questions. So if you
Good.
don't mind, I'll go ahead and get started with those.
Sure.
The first one, what is BMI versus ASCAP? I know you discussed a little bit about that. They said, does restaurant need agreements with both? And
Sure.
then
So
followed up with, is it true that we do not need BMI for live music so long as we don't cover BMI music? I know you've talked a little bit about it, but just more.
yeah, sure. So I'll take the ASCAP and BMI question first. Essentially, we are the same. We're competitors. We do the same thing. What makes us different is that we represent a different catalog of music. Songwriters can only be affiliated with one performing rights organization, and they can choose to change that. So I'll give you an example. Jack White was with BMI for many, many years. And last year he moved his catalog to ASCAP. Songwriters have they have the freedom and the ability to decide if they want to move to a different PRO. I think that's what keeps us all better at our jobs, knowing that, right? We want to make sure that we're doing a good job. And so we essentially do the same thing. Can you only have one between BMI and ASCAP? No. Just as you saw from the Hoser song Too Sweet, you had what, 7 or 8 songwriters on that? About half of them were with BMI, about half of them are with ASCAP. That is the case with many songs. So I would say for a business owner that I know you all are already very busy, business owners do not have time to go through and look at and try to figure out how to just play BMI music or how to just play ASCAP music. And that's only really as current as the moment of time you take that agreement. Again, because songwriters can decide when their term is up with, any of the organizations that they want to make a move, and they have the right to do that. If you're playing live music in your venue, I would say that if the band is playing cover songs, they are 100% playing BMI music. You could always go in if you hire a particular band regularly and you know what cover songs they're performing, you can always go in and look at the Songview database to get a better understanding of what actual songs they're being performed. If it is a local band that is playing their own written material, I would say that, if they're good enough to play regularly and play their own material, they should be affiliated with the performing rights organization. And the reason I say that is they have really no way to protect their intellectual property if they're not. If I come into your bar or restaurant and hear a local band play a song and they haven't affiliated that, and I decide that that's my song and I go and affiliate it, they don't really have any legal recourse to protect that. So it's in musicians' best interest to affiliate with a PRO. And I would also say if you do have local bands that play in your business, encourage them to go, if they are with BMI, to go on to our BMI Live, and they can register that they played at your venue, what songs they played, and then be paid out for those performances. Because that is something we get a lot from, especially bars that say, we support these local bands. How do I know my licensing fees to BMI are actually getting back to these local performers, right? I don't play Taylor Swift music, or I don't play, Willie Nelson songs. Make sure that they know that they can put those performances in through BMI and be paid on a quarterly basis. That's been a very successful program for us, and especially for up and coming musicians.
Great. And then hopping off of that, what types of performances are not eligible through BMI Live?
Really, it's live musicians. So like a DJ can't go in and put that in. A karaoke provider can't go in and put that in. It's essentially live bands. When you think about any live bands being performed, that are publicly performing at a BMI licensed venue, any genre, as long as they have those songs affiliated with BMI, they can go in, register into their account, put where they played, the day of their show, click on the songs that they performed, and then they'll receive payment for that.
Perfect. I'm not sure if you have an answer to this. You might, because of the back you showed us of the basically the songs. What type of music style is most popular among restaurants?
It's interesting. I mean, I think clearly we hear from obviously a lot of restaurants that what they're actually playing is what's current. When I go into, unless a business is done very intentionally, they create a certain vibe. Like there's a great jazz club here in Nashville called Rudy's. But clearly, if you go into Rudy's, you're never going to hear Shabuzi. You're not going to hear Hoser. Like they're creating a certain clientele. But I think when you go down Broadway or a lot of the kind of popular restaurants and bars here that have live music regularly, they're playing the songs they know that their customers want to hear, which many times are some of the more current popular songs. And in addition to like the classics that we all know and love that never get old, like Old Time Rock and Roll is a BMI song that, Bob Seger cut. And it is still one of the top performing songs. So it's a blend of kind of those songs that you hear that are the top performing songs on your, whether you're listening to the radio or on your digital music service providers. I would love if business owners, I mean, this is something, because I know businesses are so unique to where they are. The vibe in Chicago and Illinois in general could be much different than kind of the vibe in Nashville. I think even though there's a lot of famous musicians of all genres of music that live in Nashville, like the Black Keys, and there's a lot of famous musicians of all genres that live here. But when you think of Nashville, a lot of the clientele that's coming here as far as tourism is here for the country music.
Great. The next question is, are there any upcoming changes or expected updates to music licensing laws that restaurant owners should be aware of?
Not at this time. There's not. I mean, we did have some, probably many of you on this call know, there was some major legislation in the end of the late 90s called the Fairness in Music Licensing Act. And that was essentially gave small business owners who had less than 3,750 square feet. It was a very specific law. They could be exempt if they were only using radio and television in their business. It also is based on the television screens being a certain size, a certain amount of speakers. We do have information about that if you look at the Fairness in Music Licensing Law, but that was the big law that passed in the late 90s. It was really called the home style exemption, and it made it where small business owners may not have to pay for radio and television. But again, that would be playing radio in your business where you're playing ads in the background, and then much smaller TV screens than what we're accustomed to now.
Thanks. This is a really good question. What about BMI licensed music on social media?
That's great. So I love this question. So when you think about Facebook or YouTube or Vivo, all of those sites are licensed already with the PROs. So when you're looking at music on there, they're already paying for, they're collecting what music is being performed, Instagram on people's accounts, and then paying the PROs for that. So it should already be covered on that. Now, where a business owner might need a license when you think about from the internet stage is if they have their own website for their company that they've created that has music playing while you're looking at their menu. I don't see that as much anymore. I think most people when they're going out, I'm looking at the menu, I'm trying to figure out your hours. I'm trying to figure out, do I need reservations? I'm not really thinking about listening to music while I'm looking at that. So we don't see that as much anymore. But if a business does have a website where they are playing music on their website, then they would need a BMI website license, which is very inexpensive. But if it's through Facebook, YouTube, those are already being licensed. They have agreements with all of the performing rights organizations and heavily track what music is being performed on those.
That makes sense. This next question is kind of long, but I think it's a good question. So fees are in part based on total occupancy. This can be very costly for large venues that are either only open select days a week with that occupancy or only regularly use a portion of their building for regular business and thus do not reach that occupancy. Is there any consideration for these types of situations when setting fees?
I mean, we don't negotiate as far as whatever the posted fire code, that's typically what we go by. Obviously, there are unique situations. I don't know about in Illinois. I know in Wisconsin and I think Minnesota. I don't know if this is common in Illinois. There are kind of these supper clubs that are these very large venues, and they might have the portion where you or I would normally meet and have dinner, but they have these much larger areas. If they have wedding receptions, if they have anniversary parties, if they have a charitable event, it's important to know in those conversations, I would say to the business owner, talk to your licensing representative. They want to work with the business owner. If you're only using that space, a handful of times for a couple events, make sure the licensing rep understands what you're using them for. Because keep in mind, it's always the public performance of music. So a wedding reception, an anniversary party, a birthday party, where it's invite only and you've got it in a, another area of your establishment, none of the PROs license that. That is considered private. It's not where you and I, Allison, can be like, oh, we heard there's going to be a wedding reception at this, let's go like, crash the wedding reception. So in those instances, that is not licensable. Now, charitable events are different, and there is some confusion with that. And typically, even though it's a charitable event where they might take over an establishment for a fundraiser, almost 9 times out of 10, those are always licensable, because the only way that really exempts them from being licensable is everyone doing that charitable event has to be working for free. And when you think about people have security, you're paying staff at the bar, it's still where you and I could still meet, even though it's not a traditional use of their business. We could still go and not necessarily, we just heard they're having an event, we want to go support it. So I always encourage business owners, like our licensing executives want to make sure you are licensed correctly. So if you have a unique situation like that, if you have 1 or 2 special events a year where you use a much bigger portion of your establishment, talk to them about that. There's no need for you to be paying for the full occupancy, but it's never just based on someone saying, oh, our occupancy is 250. We're never at 250. They're not going to adjust it by how many people you could have in there, because essentially you're just paying for what is your fire code, what is the potential exposure of that music.
Great. I think that's a perfect way to wrap up. That was a great question, and thank you for the awesome answer. So it looks like we are done here. I would like to thank you all for attending and thank Jessica Frost with BMI. I'd also like to thank the Cook County Small Business Source for their continued support. And then after this webinar, attendees will receive an email with links to the webinar recording and presentation. Thank you all for attending. Thank you again, Jessica, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks for having me.